Imagine if there was an island in the middle of the ocean. Now imagine if there was a man who grew up on that island alone. Imagine that man is digging one day and finds a Bible. Imagine he reads it cover to cover again and again. Imagine how unadulterated, how pure, how accurately he would be able to describe what a follower of Christ was supposed to look like. Now imagine that you found that man, blindfolded him, and dropped him into 1112. Imagine we removed his blindfold and let him see, hear, and feel the people that surrounded him. Would he associate us with Christ at all? How can we become the church that Scripture has called us to? How do we create a place where that man would remove his blindfold and know something extraordinary is happening here?
Hello, everybody. I am Chandler Prazak, for those of you who don't know me. If you haven't seen my face around, I get to come and speak to you guys this week because Chris Hilkin is at Hume Lake, and we are blessed to have someone of his speaking ability to come here every week and share with us and be our pastor. But every once in a while, we share him with Live as well as Hume and some other places. So, and then Chase and I get to speak to you guys every once in a while, and we love the opportunity to talk with you guys. Another thing is to answer all of your questions, because I know you're thinking it, is yes, I'm growing out a mustache, mainly because I'm married now, and I feel like that's what men do, like you guys have seen the SpongeBob movie, right? Like now that we're men, we changed our underwear. Now that we're men, we've got a manly flair. I'm tough enough to save the day in Mr. Krabs. So, let's start. They like that. The SpongeBob movie is phenomenal. The second one, not as good. We are talking about today touch, which we have been going over this series called The Sixth Sense of 1112. And what it is obviously it's our first five senses that we know that all humans have, which is taste, smell, sight, sound, and touch. But the first one we started with was love. And if you can go ahead and throw up the definition of love that we use here in 1112, and I'll get to this in a second, but the reason that we want to start off your time in 1112 with this series called Six Senses, and the reason that we include love in here is because we believe that love should govern everything else you do in your life. The ministry and the things that you're a part of all should be backed by love. But a lot of times we don't really know what love is, do we? We think of songs in today's age, or you say, I love all these different things, but you can say, I love tacos and I love my wife, all in the same sentence, but mean two very different things. And so when we say love, we want to refer to this idea, and it's that it's an act of the will accompanied by emotion that acts judiciously on behalf of its object in order for its spiritual growth. That love is something that takes effort, that it's intentional, that it takes action. It's not just something that's thoughtless and just happens when you feel really emotional towards someone. And so the reason we want to include that with these other five senses is because here's what senses do. If you guys have taken psychology at all, you'll know that senses are basically how we perceive the world. And our sight, like right now, my sight is feeding information to my brain that I can see the light that's cast in this room, that I can perceive shapes and depths and all this different stuff, and I can also perceive faces, and that connects to who I see different people are. I can feel things, like I can feel this stand and understand that it's some type of metal or it's cold. I can smell. What are some other ones? Taste, like if I were to taste something right now, or, like Nerds Rope, you taste that, and it helps you perceive that things are good. And so with our senses, they are constantly telling our brain what life is. It's how we understand everything. And we want you to understand the world through the lens of love now. So that's why we're going through these six senses, because God created them, and there's a verse in the Bible that says God is in all and through all. And so we want you to understand that Christ created the senses, and he is able to use them to glorify himself, as well as when our whole world is viewed through the lens of love, and our perception is now via love, this action of love, we start living more effectively, and we are a better church to the rest of the world. So we want to start off your time in 1112 with helping you understand what we mean when we say, I love you, that it's not just like, I really like you a lot, and you're fun to be around, but it's that we will do this. We will love you with an act of our will accompanied by our emotion that judiciously acts on behalf of its object for your spiritual growth in order that you may all look more like Jesus. That's the whole goal of everything we do in here. is that you walk out looking like a little Jesus. That's what a Christian is. It's a little Christ. So, we're going to talk about touch today, and I want to give you guys the 4 C's of touch. The 4 C's of touch. And the first reason as a church that that touch is beneficial to us and how love governs touch is connection. Connection. There was this, his name was, I can't remember his name, Harlow's monkeys. So there was a psychology experiment done a number of years ago where they took this monkey away from its mother very early, like in the first week of its life, and they placed it with 2 surrogate mothers. Now, they were fake, but one was this contraption of like, it looked like a mother monkey with fur, and the other one was like a mother monkey with just like something that the monkey could feed off of. Now, what they realized was that after watching it and taking notes and observations, they realized that this monkey spent 80 to 90% of its time with the mother with fur. And what baffled them was they had thought that what was most important to mammals, but more specifically humans as well as monkeys, we share a lot with them. They thought what was most important was the nurturing aspect, the food that we get, nutrition, different things like that. And what they started to realize is that physical touch and the ability to connect with someone via touch is actually more vital to someone's growth and development, any kind of mammals, humans or monkeys. It's more vital that they interact and have touch than that they have food or general nutrition. Now, both are important. They're absolutely important, but they were seeing that it actually might be more harmful for someone to be touch deprived than it would be for someone to be food deprived. Also, a number of years ago, during a warring time in Russia, there was this camp that basically had a bunch of refugee children that were separated from their parents. And they had like 3 or 4 staff members to a couple hundred children. And what they found out was that these children had developmental problems across the board, both physical and psychological. So they had attachment disorders, they had psychiatric problems, their physical growth was stunted, like they didn't grow as tall. Their immune systems didn't develop, so they got sick often. They had gastrointestinal problems, so their stomachs were all messed up. And they had a hard time being able to relate to other people and show empathy and these other things. And they were saying just the fact that these children couldn't get touched as much as they were supposed to by children, have this helpful connection that's supposed to be brought by touch, it hindered them later in life when they were trying to develop and when they were trying to become successful adults. They couldn't develop in the same way. And I think a lot of times that we understand that the church is relational because we are part of it. This is your community. I mean, look around the people in this room. They're your friends. You sit next to the people that you enjoy being around. And we build connection through hugs and touches and all these different things. And you'll see, like, when someone walks up, you say, hey, what's up? You either high five or hug or something. And it's a way of greeting them in order that we can connect with them and feel like we're closer to them. And it's no shock to us that touch brings connection for us. But I think a lot of times we get this reputation as the church. And here's what I want to address a lot today, is our reputation of the church can a lot of times be that we are cold and unaffectionate and unrelational. But you who are in this room know very well that our church is very relational and that we have an interpersonal relationship with a God, and out of that relationship with Him flows our relationship with other people, and that everyone in this room and a part of this building is very personal, but the outside world doesn't always see that. And so through touch, I hope today that you can see how we can be more relational and connect to the outside world via the sense that God gave us in order to show them our God through the church and its way of connecting with people. And so with connection, they've shown that touch of all the senses is like this social glue. You know, like parents hug kids, and we talked about that a little bit. But even between friends, you guys hug. And then obviously, like you guys know, between partners. Like, I mean, if you guys probably remember in 7th or 8th grade when you guys first like held a guy's hand or a girl's hand, or you like hugged a girl or a guy for the first time. I remember one time I was in kindergarten, which a little early for this, I didn't even really understand it, but my parents came to pick me up from school, and I was playing tag with girls like you do. And And so I was like running away, and I didn't expect my parents to be there, and so I like stopped because I was like, "Oh, Mom and Dad, what's up?" And then this girl like ran up, and it's like ingrained in my brain. It's like one of the only things I remember from being like 5 years old is she ran up and kissed me on the cheek, and I was like, what just happened? Like, my parents are right there. Cool it, like this isn't. But it was so confusing as a little boy because I'm like, why did I, like, what is it about me that remembers that? Or even like, I'm sure if you guys have ever gone like on a date to the movies or something, and like you're sitting there, and then like all of a sudden like your hand gets like a little over the seat, and then you pinky like breezes their hand, and then their hand like kind of flops open, and then all of a sudden you're holding hands, and you're like, oh wow. But or if you guys have seen The Greatest Showman, like Zendaya and Zac Efron in that scene where she's singing "Never Be Enough," which legitimately that is my favorite scene of any movie. That like 3 minutes where she sings "Never Be Enough," it's just the best. It makes me cry. But here's what happens: he starts reaching down, and you see his little pinky go like this and like touch her hand, and you see her face, and it's like. But what is it about us as human beings that when we have this touch, that it almost takes our breath away? It gives us like these jittery feelings. And it's that it brings connection. Like that's how relationships start. That's how you communicate signals to the opposite gender. And I used this last two services, where in our staff meetings, I used to get up, like when Heather and I first, I was like, is she into me? Am I into you? Like, what's going on here? Because we spent a lot of time working in the same office. I would like get up from our staff meetings, and I would like brush past her, like to go to water, and I'd be like, I'm gonna get a water. Does anyone want one? And then I would like in that moment, I'm hoping that she knows like that was very intentional. And it was like little things, but like unless I'm messing around, I don't just walk up and like brush past people in staff meetings. And so it was to some level of connection to say like, hey, I touched you for a reason. Or even I remember when we went to Mission Vista's FCA one time, and over by like the math buildings, for those of you who go to Mission Vista, Timberwolves represent, we were like walking out of FCA back into the quad, and I remember we were like kind of dating at this point, and she was walking around the corner, and I was letting her go in front of me, and I just I put my hand on like her lower back, like right here, and I still remember that moment because I was like, she's okay with this, like we're cool. It was like a big step for us. And then obviously like you hold hands and you kiss and all this stuff, and it progresses. But we know just from seeing parents or people in fights or different reasons that touch is a big part of us connecting to other people. And I want you guys to see how Jesus uses touch to connect to other people, because he's the example that we all follow. In Matthew 8, verse 1. I want to give a disclaimer real quick that I think there's a lot of people in a room this size that for an unfortunate series of events that have happened in your life, maybe you don't like the word touch necessarily. Like I'm sure there's people in this room that have been touched inappropriately in some way, whether it be abuse, some kind of physical or sexual abuse, and there's things that have happened in your life that are absolutely wrong and should not have happened to you. And so what I want to say is that should not be the way that you know touch. Like when I speak of the word touch, that's connecting and it's supposed to help us be with other people. You hear this word and it's almost sickening to you. You don't like it. And whoever may have used this gift of God, this touch that's supposed to connect us, whoever used this in an inappropriate way on you in your life, they are wrong and that shouldn't have happened to you. And so I want to say I'm sorry on behalf of the way that touch is supposed to be received, that you have to have experienced it that way. But I hope that in this sermon that when I'm speaking, you can see this more as rewriting that definition that you may have of touch, that it's something that is very beneficial, that God gave us as an opportunity to love other people. And even the God of the universe came down, he stepped down from his throne and came as a man in order that he could relate to us. And right here, he shows the power of touch and how good it is supposed to be. So if you have a bad view of it, I want to say I'm sorry. That should not have happened to you. But we want to be a part of a community that helps rewrite that for you and see that touch is a powerful and beautiful thing. So, Matthew 8:1 says, when Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. You can circle that right there, touch the man. I am willing, he said. Be clean. Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, See that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourselves to the priests and offer the gifts Moses commanded as a testimony to them." So I love that one, Jesus kind of has a crowd walking with him because there was this man with leprosy. And if you don't know anything about leprosy, some of you growing up in the church might be aware of this, but leprosy was this deteriorating disease. It would literally make your fingers fall off because it had like white sores that you would get all over your body, and it would just start eating away at your skin cells. And so what happened is it was also contagious, so you would be in a community all alone with either other lepers or by yourself because you didn't want to get other people infected with leprosy. And if they wanted to get anything, like they needed to go to the market to get stuff, they literally had to walk around and yell, "Unclean, unclean," to let people know, hey, don't come near me or you're going to get leprosy. So the people that had this skin disease, it usually took like 7 to 10 years for like your skin would start to deteriorate over a long period of time. And so these people had been alone for a long time. They hadn't felt the touch of other human beings because they would give them leprosy. And so not only do they not get to touch other people, but even in their suffering of leprosy, they can't connect with other people. They can't be comforted because they can't touch anyone else. So they're alone as alone can be. I mean, they're just like the outcasts of society, and they're in a broken place. And what Jesus does is he comes with a crowd following him, and he touches the man with leprosy. And he could have very easily, like if one of y'all in the back row, Kent back there in the back row, I could look at Kent and be like, if Kent had leprosy, I'd be like, "You're healed of leprosy." And that's what Jesus could have done. Been like, "Don't come near me, but you're good. Like, leprosy's gone." But instead, Jesus walked up to me and he touched the man because he knew something that we should realize as the church is that touch was a powerful part of connecting to this man. And he wanted to show people that he, as something clean, was for the first time making the unclean clean, instead of the reverse process that normally happens, where when unclean touches clean, it becomes unclean. But Jesus is the first time that we see that something clean, a perfect man, comes into our lives full of sin and shame and touches the unclean and makes us clean and free and righteous and living with him. And he connects with this man by saying, "Look, I'm going to meet you in your pain. I'm going to touch you because I know that's what's hurting more than this leprosy." And Jesus is a personal God that came down to be a personal man in order that we could connect with through touch. And in the same part of that story, Jesus also uses this, which lends to our second C, which is comfort. He used this to comfort the man who's hurting, who hasn't been able to touch anyone. He comforts him by touching him. Comfort is something that is another part of this touch that we get to, as the church, use to help the world around us, because there are a lot of hurting people. Like even, I know it's silly, but if you've ever been to a haunted house with your friends or seen like a scary movie, what do? You all like bunch up and like you just like stay there and like, oh, you go through like this, but you're like next to each other and you're like grabbing arms. Or like even, and guys, we aren't immune to this too. Like you'll pretend to be tough, but like I've watched movies with my dudes too, and like there's times where the movie's scary and we're all like cuddling with each other and we're like, movies don't scare me except jump scares. Jump scares, I lose my cool, and at that point, I will hug anyone near me for comfort. But again, like when we're scared of the dark, or we're in a haunted house or a scary movie, what do? We touch, we grab someone to know that we can be comforted, that we have another person with us in this. Or when you see someone crying, what do? You hug them. Or you like pat them on the back and you're like, there, it's okay. Like, no need to. Or even like in Finding Nemo when Marlin's like freaking out. He's like, oh no, where's my son? Dory comes up to him, he's like, there, and like touches him. And it's like, that's what, for some reason, it's innate in our bodies that we know to touch other people when they are in hurting circumstances. And so, too, as the church, we get to reach out into other people's lives, and we get to connect with them and also comfort them in their times of hurt and need. Because I guarantee you there's people at your schools who are not Christian and don't follow the Christian guidelines, or they don't follow the way we do our lives. They don't follow our God, and they don't want to follow his rules. And so what happens is a lot of times we come in and they want to talk to us about their life. Maybe they're having sex with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and they're not Christian, so they don't see anything wrong with it, but they still feel empty and broken after this time that they have with their partner. And then you come in and you're like, you shouldn't be having sex with your boyfriend or girlfriend, and then maybe you might feel love. And right then and there, you had a moment to connect with them and comfort them as someone who's hurting as a part of the church, but they just see you as judgmental and cold. And I'm not saying that we accept that and we just go, oh, cool, like do whatever, but we love them. And then once they decide to become a Christian, that's when we help them change their rules. And you meet them where you're at and you say, I'm sorry that you're going through that. I'm going to suffer with you. Because here's what they'll remember. is they'll say, even in my hard times, when I wasn't a Christian and I didn't follow their guidelines, there's people that have always been there for me. And it's Christians. I don't know, like it doesn't seem like they have some kind of motive other than they're not trying to get anything out of me or from me. They were just there whenever I needed them. And I think that's such a cool thing. I remember this song. It's called, I think it's called Crazy Christians. I don't know. It's this weird country song. I listen to country music. It's whatever. And it was like, he was saying, like, if anything bad's happening in my life, you know who I'm going to turn to? Those crazy Christians. And he's like, yeah, they seem bizarre on the surface, but when things go wrong, that's who I'm going to turn to, because they know that we're the people that are always there to comfort them. And that's how, as the church, we get to be people that help others in their spiritual growth, that they get to look more like Jesus. Because when they feel like they're out of option and there's no one left to turn to, they think to themselves, you know who's always been there? The Christians. The people who have been concerned about my spiritual growth, who've chosen to love me even though they have no reason to. And that's how we get to connect and comfort. And number 3 is care. We get to care for others. Go ahead and turn with me to Luke 10. Luke 10:25. Setting up the story real quick, while you're turning to Luke 10:25, is there was these people called the Pharisees, or the teachers of the law. They were these individuals they were kind of like in charge of everything, but they also had like this pride issue, and they made themselves look good, but they would like shame other people. And so Jesus is saying, if you're the people running my church, you're running it way wrong. So he comes on the scene, and they start questioning him because they don't like Jesus and the fact that he's changing everything and trying to bring it back to what he originally intended to create. And so they kind of get in fights, and they try and trap Jesus with questioning and make him look bad. So this is where we are in 25, and it says, on one occasion, an expert of the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? So he's saying, like, hey, if you're some wise rabbi, what do I got to do to inherit eternal life? And trying to see what he says, trying to catch him off guard. What is written in the law, he replied. How do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. This was like the underlying premise of their law. All Leviticus, you're like, that book seems so boring. But the underlying thing was this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And it was that you would that was the point of the law, that we would love God with our hearts. And so they're like, well, we've done that. And that's what he says. You have answered it correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And so Jesus is telling him to love your neighbor as yourself as well. And so he's basically saying, like, look, I've done this. I'm doing it well. And Jesus is saying, you haven't loved the Lord your God. You haven't kept what the point of this law is, because there's these people named the Samaritans who were half Jew, which were God's chosen people, and half Gentile, those who weren't God's chosen people. And they were a half-breed. It was when the two came together, and it was their offspring. And so people hated them because the Jews didn't accept them and the Gentiles didn't accept them. And the Pharisees literally rejected these people. They mocked them, they spit on them, they were very rude to them. And Jesus is saying, you haven't loved them. And so he wants to show them who their neighbor is. And this is what he says. In a reply, Jesus said, and there was a man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road. When he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So to a Levite, when he came to the place, saw him and passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, and Jesus is emphasizing this to the person who's telling the story, as he traveled, came where the man was, and he saw him, and he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave it to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you any extra expense you may have. And what Jesus is doing right here is he's telling a story. He's saying, look, this is the reputation that the church has, is of these first two, the priest and the Levite. Because these people by the law weren't allowed to interact with this man that was half dead, which basically meant if you walked past, you'd basically say, I think he looks dead. And they weren't allowed to interact with this unclean like we've talked about, because they saw it as unclean. And so they would pass by on the other side. But Jesus said, that's not the point of the law. This is the point of the law. A Samaritan. And he comes in and he starts taking care of this man. He bandages him. He cleans him up. He pours oil and wine on his wounds. And in order to bandage someone, you can't bandage someone without touching them. Like, you have to get your hands dirty. You have to clean them off. You have to help them and nurse them back to health. This man was actively using touch, his ability that God gave him to connect to this man and to take care of him. In the same way, we as the church need to be a people who take care of the world around us. We do this thing as the church, North Coast Church, called the Weekend of Service, which is every 18 months for a weekend our church shuts down and we go out and we serve the community. We do service projects. We do a couple $1 million worth of service projects with all the amount of people at North Coast, and we improve our community. And it's funny because touch is something that is, I think physical touch is something that's innately emotional to us. Because when people describe what our church has done for them, they use emotion words, or they use touch words to describe emotional things. I was touched by what your church did for our school. What does that mean? It means that they were moved by us using our hands to serve them. That people say, or even when people come into 11:12, they're like, that place felt very warm. They say it felt warm is something that we feel. They're using descriptive words of touch to describe emotions that they're feeling, which means that they feel as if they are valued and it's a place that they is safe and they are welcome back to. And as Luke 10:25, it gives us this picture of we need to take care of the less fortunate, those who are hurting or in pain. It's the poor, the needy, the orphans, the widows. I mean, you'll read the New Testament, and it's so concerned with us taking care of the less fortunate, because as a church body, we get to show the other world the power and love of our five senses by using touch to get our hands dirty and take care of the people around us. And we get to bridge that gap for people that think, again, that the church is unrelational, that it's full of a bunch of cold people who do ritual practices. No, it's full of people who want to love and serve, and we are going to get our hands dirty loving others and connecting with them and comforting them. And the fourth C of touch is we do this for community. There was this study done in the NBA a couple of years ago, and they wanted to see, touch is the sense that they know the least about, that they're like years behind compared to the other senses, and they're trying to find out more about this and what makes us tick as human beings when it comes to touch. And so they did this study on some NBA teams, and they were tracking touch. And so they said anytime a team scored a basket, like what was the celebratory touch? So things like fist bumps or like high fives, chest bumps, or like guys always slap each other's butt in games. What they found is that celebratory touch in the first half of the season. They watched the first two halves of the season, or each half of the season. They found that the teams that engaged in more celebratory touch in the first half of the season, on average, won more games and were better teams in the second half of the season. That touch literally had such a strong bonding chemical that it made the teams play better when teams engaged in touch with each other. So all y'all who are on sports teams, remember, like when you're slapping someone's butt, it's not just like good game. You're literally encouraging them to play better. And that's the power of touch, is that we can be, that parents and children bond for the first time over touch. That people who are in fights make up via hugs and touch. That even with siblings, like your parents are like, hug, you guys have to hug it out, hug for 10 seconds, and you're like, and I don't know that really works because it's kind of forced, but even we know that there's a bonding power of touch, that it brings us together as a community and makes us one, that we can be a better ministry via the way we use touch. And I'm not saying to go around and now everyone needs to touch each other all the time, like everywhere you're just constantly touching each other. And sometimes, I think a lot of people think us guys touch too much in here sometimes, but this isn't my way of saying we all need to touch more. Make sure you hug everyone all the time, and we just get rid of chairs and we just have big bean bags and everyone's cuddling. That's not what we're talking about. But I'm saying that this place we can transform into a community via the way we use touch. That when people walk into this building, we want them to say, I'm not really sure I understand it. And I've heard this said, that people will come to our community nights and our different events, and they'll say, I don't really understand this church fully. I don't understand God yet. But that place just felt so warm. It felt so inviting. And that's even why, Natalie spent so much effort making, Natalie's over there. Natalie spent so much effort making this room look the way it does because it feels inviting. It's the ambiance. And then you guys are the people that fill the room that also make it warm and welcoming. That when someone walks in for the first time, they're not going to be like, that was really awkward. I just stood there the whole time and didn't really talk to anyone, and I was kind of closed off in a circle, but they feel invited in. This place feels like home to them. And we get to be that at our schools, we get to be that at our jobs, and here at church, we get to be the reason in the community called the church, that people want to come into because they see that we have a relational God, that we are relational, and that we connect with people because our God connected with us, that he wasn't just some big high being in the sky that sent down a list of rules and said, do this, but he wrote this Bible as a way to show you how much he connects with you and cares about you and wants a relationship with you. And so when we start following this Bible and reading this scripture, we become people who learn to connect with others, to love others in a way that brings them closer, that makes them look more like Jesus. And that's what I want to make the emphasis of this first series, is as we close out, this is our last week, the reason we started off with the sixth sense of 11:12 in love is because we want you guys to know that when we say the words, I love you, it's not just some cool phrase that we use to be like, yeah, you're pretty cool, see you later, I love you. It's not that. And even I've said I love you to some of the guy students before, and it's for them, it's kind of jarring. They're like, did you just say I love you? That was kind of weird. And they're like, they get all awkward, and they're like, see you later, love you too. And it's uncomfortable for them at first. But when I say I love you, I'm not like, love you, bye, kisses. That's not what I mean when I say I love you. It's that I am choosing with action to make you look more like Jesus, that my action will be accompanied by emotion, that if you are hurting, I will hurt with you, that if you are joyous or celebrating something, I will celebrate with you, that it's accompanied by emotion, and that it judiciously acts, that it knows when to and when not to, that we're not just going to spend every week going to get ice cream, because there's hard things in this life that need to be talked about. And there will be weeks for getting ice cream, but there's going to be weeks for hard conversations. It's judicious. That when we say we love you, and we give you, when we say we love you, and we'll buy student Starbucks, or we'll buy you food or whatever, and we're like, we love you, and you're like, oh, awesome. But don't get confused. Food and gifts are not what love is. That is a part of love. And when we look at you and we say, there's this area of your life that I think you need to improve on, and it hurts, in the same phrase we can say, I love you, and it's judicious. It knows when to and when not to. Because hard conversations need to be had, joyous conversations need to be had, and we are here for both of you, for both of those. We are here to love you. That we, as staff in 11:12, and even as you and students in 11:12, we want your furthered spiritual growth. We want you to look more like Jesus. That when I get up to heaven, I hope I'm standing in front of the Creator, and he goes, how did you steward your time in 11:12? I hope this is the same for all of you. I hope that I can look at him and be like, well, I don't want to stand there and say, we had a lot of fun, because God's going to be like, yeah, that's part of it, but you missed out on this other side of things. I want to get up to heaven and say, how did you steward your time in 11:12? And I look at this room of people, and I say, well, hopefully, based on what I tried to do and the actions I tried to show, these people all look more like you. That was my goal, and I followed you as best I could. And I hope that in following me, they also looked more like you. And that's the same for you guys, that in the way you try and live out your life looking more like Jesus, the world around you will start to look more like Jesus, because the way that you love. And one of the best ways to do that is by being in this word, to understand what this love is all about. And we commit to teaching you truths from this word in order that you will look more like our God, that you will look more like Jesus at the end of your life. Because that's what we are, Christians, a bunch of little Christ. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for loving us, God, and thank you for living perfect and using yourself as an example for us to follow in order that we may look more like you. You loved us first in order to make us like you. Now may we love other people. May we use touch in a productive way to connect, to comfort, to care, and to create community with those around us, God, so that they can see you are the personal God that wants a personal relationship with them, and that you're not just some cold being in the sky. This church isn't about rituals, God. We are about caring for others, and we're for the lost and broken and the people that you loved. May we look like you in the way that we love. We pray these things in your name. Amen.